the stories I heard, and he was very, very extremely humble in his statement. Till I got his card, and in fact I didn't read his card till I got into the car, and then I stopped my car somewhere, I think beyond the Pune club, and I saw and read it in the light of the car, and it was written Veer Chakra, and he had never mentioned it to me that he was a Veer Chakra. So I was, it was the first thing you do is normally guys like us mention that, listen, I was a Veer Chakra and all that, but Colonel Lalit made sure that he gave no impression about it. And what was most interesting, and Satish, you'll do the formal introduction of. Sorry for because you went out, so I usurped your. Well, why I want you guys to, all of you to hear it is because, and he told me is that you guys, it's mandatory for all of us to hear the stories of Kargil because some of us don't get to know about what actually happened. And it fundamentally shows, I think it's more interesting to see that, you know, when we talk in business, we talk about leadership and all this stuff. And the fact is that I don't think there's a more naked and honest form of leadership than men fighting with the soldiers in a battle. I think that's the actual test of leadership. Everything else in management terms is jargon and nice things to talk about, and here we speak. But this is leadership in action. What I was during my interaction, what I really admired was throughout this statement, it was this outstanding commitment or loyalty to subordinates, which is a rare quality. Okay. You see outstanding commitment to bosses in our kind of environment. Right? Yes, and that is fundamentally what makes the difference between outstanding leadership and a pedestrian kind of a hierarchy. What I would say, in my words of English, that's pedestrian. If you have outstanding loyalty to seniors, it's a highly mutated form of a leadership, and that's why I'm going to not take away the charm of his experience, but I think it's a great honor that sir you have come to Cummins Diesel because it's really great honor to see a Veer Chakra fundamentally. And what you won't know, he'll also share with you the Paramveer Chakra, one of the boys who won the Paramveer Chakra was in his unit. And more interesting, and he refused to tell you that, but here is a leadership, he was pulled out of a different unit when the Kargil war started. So this is not his unit. I know he'll share with you. This is his father's unit and he never worked in this unit. So imagine going into a war with not knowing the people under you, okay, into a crisis situation, purely based on your professional experience and trusting people you have never met the day before. It's like coming to 100 times more difficult than coming to CDSS one day and then achieving the 150% AOP. Okay. Seriously, the next quarter. So you can imagine how difficult it is. Okay. And seriously, so I was amazed when I heard this story. I was amazed that a guy can be pulled up during a war and sent to a different unit. He doesn't know anybody from Adam or Eve. And I think it's an outstanding exhibition of leadership. And I don't want to deprive you. I would just ask Satish to just do the just read the formal introduction of Colonel, and then I'll leave it up to. And once again, thank you, sir. And I have a meeting, so I asked him that, look, I have an extremely crucial meeting at 4. Could you prepone it? He was gracious enough to come a bit earlier. And I think it's been really sweet of you. Thank you. What happened?
I already circulated his biodata to you, and I'll just go through it briefly just to give you his introduction. So, Colonel Lalit Rai is a Veer Chakra recipient, like Chief explained. He's from Bishop's Cotton School, Bangalore, and subsequently he joined the army as an infantryman, and he joined the 11 Gurkha Rifles. Further to that, of course, during his 25 years of service, he has been in the various command and staff appointments all over. He has done his, he's also postgraduated from the College of Defence Management, and he's also returned from the Naval Postgraduate School at Monterey, USA. Prior to that, he has commanded the 17 Rashtriya Rifles, and we keep hearing about it in the news as the Doda district in Jammu and Kashmir, and he was very much there and fighting out insurgency and militants. And his battalion, which he has rightly christened the Stormy 17. He's a very active and a keen sportsman and a mountaineer. And apart from that, he is also an all-round sportsman, enjoys playing golf, tennis, and other games. In June '99, Colonel Rai took over the command of 11 Gurkhas, and he led the battalion into the battles of Kargil War, which we heard about it in the news. Probably first time we were slightly near to it, watching it through the channels, but here we have an experience, a first-hand experience of what actually happened. we heard of the Batalic sector in Kargil. That's at altitudes of over 18,000 feet. And he was very much there. And he's had bullet and splinter injuries on his legs. And in spite of his bleeding, as a commanding officer, led his men into the war. Because of the exceptional order and inspirational leadership, like what also our chief mentioned, the president awarded the Veer Chakra to him. And in his battalion was also coveted the Chief of Army Staff Unit Citation, which is the bravest of the brave. And that is what was in the Operation Vijay. So with that small little introduction, I'll hand over to Colonel Rai to share his experiences of the Kargil War. Colonel Rai, please.
Am I audible?
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you. Right, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I must put on record that it is a great pleasure and honor to be here in front of you today. And I must be thankful to one gentleman who is sitting down here. That's your chief. We also have a chief back in Delhi. And I must say, you have a very dynamic chief. And after having gone through or heard about what all he did in life before he came here, I am all praise for him. And because I share his love for dynamism in life, and I am a man who's got a lot of josh and activity within, like your chief, we hit it off well. I mean, that's why I'm here. And when the request came for me to give you a talk, I said, he's one man I cannot refuse. Besides, it's always a pleasure interacting with good people. Right. Very kind words were spoken about me. I'm very thankful for that. Now I'll come down to the talk proper. Firstly, what I'm going to tell you today is basically the battle account of a battalion, that is an infantry battalion of the Indian Army. Why is it important for you all to know what an infantry battalion did in war? I think any country or any nation that respects its soldiers is a nation which will move forward and progress forward and be a powerful nation in future. And it also augurs well that when its citizens give interest to tales of valor, courage, sacrifice of a simple soldier in battle, like I already said, it will augur well for the fate of that particular nation. It is also important for you all to know, because this is a very different type of leadership, as has already been brought out and referred to by your chief. Here is leadership, or here is motivation, which is a little different from the motivation that we learn in the management books. As defined, because I'm also some sort of a management guy. You know, management means making people do, maybe making people want to do what they want, well, what the management wants them to do. Well, in war, it's not so simple. There are bullets flying very fierce and thick, and here is you sitting under a stone with all this artillery fire coming on, shaking you right down to your bones, and lead flying thick and hot, so close that you feel scared even nodding your head because you might catch some lead. And at that point of time, to tell a soldier, come on, get up, let's charge, head on, where the enemy is sitting down. And the soldier, at that point of time, gets up without a second thought, without arguing and saying, it's not my turn, it's Banda's turn today. I think that is the ultimate in motivation. Don't you think so? That I feel is the ultimate in motivation. So we have in the army today, you'll be proud to know, the Indian Army achieved that kind of motivation with the troops. Otherwise, if you really look at it, what is the pay that you're giving a soldier? What are the perks that you're giving to a soldier? You're keeping him in the field area for half his life. His wife and children are suffering down here. Which class his child is studying, he doesn't know, because he comes on leave only during 2 months a year. Yet, when the requirement is there, he gets up and faces the bullet and charges in front. So gentlemen, here I would like to bring a point to say, it is just not the money, it is not the perks, it is not just the environment that you are in, it is not the management only that brings about this sort of a motivation. It is much more. It is a commitment to your nation. It's a sense of duty. And I think to that end, all of you must also understand that just by doing your duty here is not adequate. You must think and do something for the nation. Think what the soldiers are doing. So the first step towards that direction is to know what the soldiers are doing for you and for the nation. Right. Now coming down to this of Vijay, you would have heard a lot about it, you would have read a lot about it, you would have seen a lot about it in the on TV and media. But there are a lot of things which you don't know, because that's what I'm trying to tell you now. As we all know, somewhere around 5th of May, there was a patrol party which went, and when it was going through the areas which are inaccessible or inhospitable during winters, it came under fire from supposedly militants. And when it got stuck there, it was extricated by some battalions, and then the complete Operation Vijay came about. Now what is the background to this? In 1965, Operation Gibraltar, that was the name which is given to the operation. It was headed by a General Malik Qasim, I think, from the Pakistani army. The plan was very simple. They raised 8 force level army, with each force having 6 columns, and each columns having 6 companies, and each company having 130 men in it, which means almost 30,000 troops in all. They raised this army. This army had people from the Razakars, the something like our BSF, the Rangers, the Mujahids, so-called Mujahids. They are the people who are sacrificing for the religion and for the supposedly liberation of Kashmir. Then they had the regulars from the Special Forces group to train these men. It was a concocted sort of a plan where few trained generals who had read lots about Mao's guerrilla tactics and the political type of situation which could be created by these guerrilla tactics, and after having mugged up those books, they thought they would try this sort of a thing with India here. So the training went on proper, and even the Chinese are reportedly, they reportedly gave them some support on this training, and for about 6 months they trained in Pakistan and they were released into India. Plan was very simple. They were to infiltrate into India in 2s and 3s through the border, concentrate behind our lines, and then hit at vital installations like your TV stations, radio stations, main bridges, destroy them, take over other big industrial installations, hit the police stations, hit the army, cause attrition, etc., etc. Suffice to say that this thing failed. It failed not because of the lack of efforts, it's because one small thing which they forgot or which they did not cater for was the spirit or the national spirit of the people of Jammu and Kashmir, and especially Ladakh region. They were under the impression that once these people start hitting and the tide starts flowing into their direction, the people will rise. They would be given a lot of support in terms of money and arms, and they would rise against the government, and then it would be a fait accompli, where the complete Jammu and Kashmir would then be subjugated under Pakistan. But that did not happen. The people did not respond to their calls. Matter of fact, they helped the Indian army to locate these people and destroy them in detail. One of the grandiose plans that time was, if you know a little bit of geography of India and the Jammu and Pakistan side, there is a road which goes from Jammu up to Srinagar, then from Srinagar up to Leh. Now this is the main lifeline for the complete region of Leh Ladakh. There's another road which goes through Ufshi Manali towards the east and then up north towards Srinagar, towards Leh Ladakh. But this road is not fully developed. As far as air is concerned, there is an airport at Leh, but it cannot sustain the amount of supplies and the ammunition that you require to sustain your troops and even the people there. Because 6 months of the year, this road is closed due to the snow, heavy snow. This pass, this road which goes from Jammu towards Srinagar and Leh, goes to a pass called Jozila Pass, which is shut down 6 months a year due to heavy snow. So their idea at that time also was to sit down, block this road, Jammu, Srinagar, Leh, cut the complete Leh Ladakh area off, and then by the time India would react, international intervention would come in and Jammu and Kashmir would be severed altogether. This was the plan. It failed that time. That time when it failed, there was a very young officer who had just got commissioned and he was part of the special services group. That is the special force of the Pakistani, very elite Pakistan army group. That young officer, this plan was breeding in his mind. And again, in 1999, the plan was during winter months, when the bunkers and the permanent defenses of India are not occupied due to heavy snow, because we moved down during winter and then occupied during summer again. They would quickly come and occupy these areas, make themselves comfortable, take positions, and as the snow melts and the Indian army starts coming up, that time hit them, cause attrition, block the road again and again. By the time we would react, the international intervention would be there, and the complete LC would be realigned, and they would take the whole of Leh Ladakh and Jammu and Kashmir, portion of Jammu and Kashmir. So this general again tried the same stuff. That same lieutenant who was there at that time had now become a general, and that general, for your information, General Parvez Musharraf. So this was his plan. Right. Now, I have already dwelt upon the slide geography. I'll just give you a brief about the general area. Firstly, about the type of enemy that we faced. It is not one enemy that we faced. It is 3 enemies that we faced. First enemy was the weather. Extremely cold. Even at that time, in May, it was minus 28 to minus 32 degrees Celsius. At that kind of temperature, even doing your normal jobs in the morning becomes extremely difficult. It's a pain. And in that cold, if your naked hand touches your weapons, it gets stuck because of the extreme cold, and it has to be cut and surgically removed. That is the type of cold I am talking about. Then there are cold related problems. The cold related problems are hypoxia, lack of oxygen, your extreme cold like your chill plagues, frostbite. Then you have something called pulmonary edema, your cerebral edema. Pulmonary edema, your lungs get filled with your own fluid. You don't secrete the fluid. And before you say jack, you drown in your own fluid. It's the most terrible death. Cerebral edema, your brains get filled with your own fluid. And you start doing all funny sort of things. That happened to us because I got a report one fine morning that one Jawan is digging trenches all over. So I said, this boy, even in this cold and difficult place, he is doing such hard work, and I was very appreciative. But then we realized he started digging more than 5-6 trenches. Till evening he was digging from the morning. Then we realized there's something wrong. So he had got that initial stages of that cerebral edema. And of course, before we could do anything, he was no more. So this is the type of disease that you have. The second enemy was the high altitude. Extreme high altitude, 18,000, 17,000 feet. Those of you who are enthusiasts, physical enthusiasts, must have gone to Singar. When you walk and climb Singar, not through the normal route, just straight up like this, on a very difficult or a rainy day, that is like a, what shall we say, a cakewalk compared to what you have to negotiate there. It's absolutely like this there. Very, very cold, the wind chill factor, and then the high altitude effects like hypoxia, lack of oxygen. Your capability is reduced to about 40 to 50%. That is, if you can carry 100 kgs here, you can carry only 40 kgs there. And that is just an example. But normally, you cannot carry more than 15 to 20 kgs on your back. The best, the healthiest, the strongest guy. And that too, you got to attack uphill like this. The enemy sitting on top. And of course, the third enemy was the enemy himself. Well ensconced, well supplied, well trained, sitting right on top of there, dominating you. Now this is the type of odds that we faced. When they talk about they faced heavy odds. This is the type of heavy odds we are talking about. Before you even enjoy the battle, you have already had to fight so many things. So on 5th of May, when we came to know that this has happened and the patrolling party got trapped, that is the time my battalion was coming down from Siachen Glacier, 23,000 feet above sea level. And we thought our advance party had already moved to Pune, and people were already thinking how to, what time of the evening we should go to the main street and whether we should go to Chitle Bandhu or Karachi Sweets. That is the time we came to know that no, it is neither of these, you have to go via Kargil. And we were redirected. My advance party was here, I called them back from right here. When the battle was enjoined in May, I was commanding the Doda battalion, the Rashtriya Rifle battalion, fighting against militants in the forests of Doda. And every day it used to be a painful affair. I had a big house all to myself, about 6 or 7 rooms. And every day I had to change my room where I used to sleep. Because in the evening I used to get rocket attacks, machine gun fire on my place. Because they knew if the commanding officer is killed, half the battle is won. So every day I had to change my room where I sleep. Because it was surrounded all over by mountains and you cannot sort of keep them away from there. So when I got a chance, my colonel of the regiment, General Yadav, who is going to be the deputy chief soon, when he told me, look, 1st Level Gurkha Rifles is there, your father's battalion, and they are in trouble, they are in battle over there, would you like to take over the battalion? I said, yes, I will. But like he said, it was very difficult, not knowing your men, not knowing your JCOs, not knowing your officers, not knowing the terrain, and not knowing the enemy. If you have read Confucius, you must have knowledge about what he says. I would have lost 100 battles, but I was lucky. Like I said, fortune favors the brave. I said, I will do it. I just counted upon one aspect. I said, my father has commanded this battalion, and I being his son, they know by reputation who I am, and that is good enough. And if a man has faith in himself, everything else will open its way. And that's what happened. So in June I landed up there. When I landed up there, the battalion was already well joined in battle with the enemy. Now the terrain of that area, you see here, this is the watershed. Now what is the watershed? Watershed is the highest point of the mountains joined. That is the ridge line. It's called a watershed because even if a drop of water falls down, half a drop going right and half a drop going left hypothetically, that becomes the origin for a river. because that is the highest point of that area. So this is the watershed which separates Pakistan, this side, from India, this side. The road which I was telling you about, which comes from Jammu, Srinagar, Leh, is this road, like this. Plan was simple, that they would come over this ridge line here from here, because it is little gradual in their side, and here these are the spurs which are coming out like fingers. Can you see these fingers? They are called the spurs. It's just like those mountain side which is just rolling down like this and then it touches the ground. But these spurs are not so kind like the ones over here. These are huge ones, and the altitude around here is around 18,000, 19,000 feet above sea level. And these are the valleys in between them. These are the mountain streams which flow down and join this Indus River. And this Indus River itself goes down slightly south and then goes into Pakistan. The plan was, during winters, through helicopters get dropped here, 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 here in these areas, come across and occupy places right up to here, to here, to here, to here. And then, through observation and by fire, dominate this complete road and cause a blockage here. Do not permit our convoys to move towards that side, towards Leh. This is going towards Leh. And they did just that. They did as per plan. Winters, the helicopters dropped them, fantastic equipment they had, the best equipment they had bought from the Scandinavian countries, and they occupied all these places right up to here. And the interstate distance between these two, let's say from this spur to this spur, between the valley is about 2 to 3 kilometers. By sight you can see, but walking is a great difficulty. So when the battalion was asked to move, the first patrol which was trapped somewhere here near this Kukarthang area and Khaluvar area here, somewhere around here. That patrol party was also very interesting how they got caught. When the patrol party, much to the bad luck of the Pakistani army, normally the snow starts thawing down somewhere in July. And they had planned that by July we will be well ensconced and well placed over there. However, due to our good luck, the snow started melting much earlier this time. It was somewhere in May the snow started melting. So, good sense prevailed, and in May itself our patrolling party started going up these areas, because our permanent defenses are in these areas. They started going up these areas like this, in May itself. So when this patrolling party of about 130, one officer, one JSU and 30 Jawans, they were making the way up like this here, in this area. They were actually going through Pakistani positions, we were already there. But the Pakistanis did not open fire at that time. They let them pass through because they were not totally prepared. They were waiting till July. But to the good luck or the bad luck of the Pakistanis, the patrol party commander, he established his base over here, kept about 10 to 15 chaps here, and with 15 chaps he moved up. When he had just gone about 3 to 4 kilometers ahead, he realized that the radio set one extra battery which he is supposed to carry, 2 or 3 extra batteries, he had not carried. So he admonished the radio operator and told him, you go back now with 4 or 5 chaps and get the extra batteries and come back. Now when these 4 or 5 chaps of the patrol party started coming back because of the high altitude and the blizzard and the snow, it was a terrible weather there, they lost their way and they did not retrace the place from where they came. So they diverted off the main route. When they diverted off the main route, they came and hit bang onto the Pakistani post where they were sitting down. That time they had no choice, so they had to open fire, and they opened fire. And all these 5 chaps were killed. The moment now this sound of fire was heard, then the officer came down over here from the top. And he realized that when these chaps came there, they also came under fire and they were also pinned down there. 2 or 3 of them were killed immediately and the rest were pinned down. And we started getting desperate messages on the radio set that so-and-so patrol is caught up here. These people who were here, they tried to rush up, again 2 or 3 people killed and they were also pinned down. Heavy fire. Now at that point of time, no one ever imagined that it would be the Pakistani army which would be doing this. At the most we thought it would be a few militants who are holed up there and causing this sort of damage. It happens that they have those training camps over there, militants also. We thought must be 15, 20 of them must have got together and they may have hit a militant camp by mistake and they may be doing this damage. But the type of fire that came and the way, the manner in which the firing came, we are experts in our own field, we know. The way you fire a rifle, I'll tell you whether you are trained, not trained, and whether you are scared or not scared while you are firing it. By the way you fire. It sounds very strange, but it's true. In the pattern of firing, the manner in which they fired, the manner in which they conducted themselves, we knew that this cannot be a militant. It has to be a trained soldier. And that is the time alarm bells started ringing. And slowly, not only this patrol, all over. Now this area is Patalik area, which is towards the north. All over, not towards Tiger Hill, which is towards the central and Dras area. Then further south, Moscow Valley. From all over, reports started coming about skirmishes like this. That is the time alarm bells rang and people generally alerted everybody and whole battalions were moved up to see and probe what is it. But even then the picture was not clear. So by around mid-May or end June, the picture started becoming clearer and clearer. By not end June, by end May and beginning June. My battalion was asked to move by mid-May after extricating this patrol. So the battalion moved, they were in Nurla, Leh Ladakh over here, relaxing. Half the party was already in Pune, they were called back. We came up this way and then they started moving up like this. Now the orders were very unclear. In army, everything has to be crystal clear. You will capture so-and-so area by so-and-so times, likely enemy here, there, etc. In this case, it was not very clear. Said there is some enemy, we'll have to find out how many. In this general area, you have to find out the specific area and capture it. So they battalion started probing this area. When they started probing this area, it started coming under severe fire over here, all over this place. Right from here upwards, from this place down. We had to fight our way up. And the modus operandi was very simple. Keep moving till fire comes on you. When fire comes on you, keep probing till whatever you can, till you draw actual very, very heavy fire. And we managed to hold on to half this area here, small portion of this area here, and up to this Gregor Nala here, like this. Right from here. And my base was at Jaldur. And that is the time when we were stuck there was no progress made, I got the call. And normally, the army is slightly stingy on expenses. They normally give you one helicopter to move. This time they made sure they gave me 2 helicopters. Even if one helicopter fails, the other one should carry me back to Jaldur. So I reached Jaldur and my second in command was in command at that point of time. He was a half colonel. And the moment I got down, he embraced me very tightly. Until date, I keep telling him and his wife that it must have been the envy of your wife the way you embraced me. Because he also told me, sir, I've never been so glad in my life to see any face like yours. Because the whole responsibility is off his head now. It comes to my head. After handing over, immediately after 5 or 6 minutes, there was intense shelling in that area. And my reception party was head and skirt everywhere, and I also got into one of those Bakri huts over there. And that is the way I was inducted into that battlefield. Till the mid and end of June, we kept probing here, tried our best to make progress, and even I contemplated attack on this Kukarthang and this Muntur Dhaba area. But we knew we would buy a lot of casualties. By now, we were very clear that it was a solid enemy and they were in good strength. There must have been at least in this general area about 500 people. In this general area about 500 people. In this general area another 500 people. Now, in our assessment, we realized that in this complete area, this place called Khalubar Top here was the main key feature, because all the administrative tracks or the routes from Pakistan used to come through like this and come here like this and then go from here like this, go from here like this and come from there down like this. In other words, if anyone was to control this area of Khalubar Top, would control the complete area. Or, in other words, if we would capture this area of Khalubar Top, we would make this complete area untenable by the enemy because of the fact that we would exercise control over the routes of their reinforcements. But like the proverbial situation, everybody knows that the cat has to be belled, but who is going to bell the cat was the situation. We know that this capture of this would render the whole thing useless, but who's going to capture it and how? Because this complete area has got enemy here, this area has got enemy here, this area has got enemy here. You try to go like this, you come to a crossfire. You try to go like this, come to a crossfire. You try to go like this is what he wants. You capture this, then he causes attrition, then he goes back here. You capture this, again a lot of attrition and damage to you, again he goes back slightly further. He keeps on moving back in steps. He keeps killing you and he keeps putting a lot of casualties on you. And by the time you reach over here, it's already 6 months over. And your impetus is also dead. Your complete momentum is dead. That's what he wants. So that is the time when they, I still discuss with my officers, and we have very interesting sort of interaction with them. That is the time my officers, when I volunteered to capture this Kaluba top, I just volunteered. I told the General Officer Commanding, sir, I will do it. And the way my officers looked at me, I could make out that they are thinking that I had gone mad. I had got cerebral edema at that point of time. And they confessed even today. They confessed, they said, sir, we thought you had cerebral edema. Because it's a suicide letter. And another interesting thing which my officer told me was, he says his name is Major R.P. Singh, he's from Lucknow, very humorous chap. Like I say, a sense of humor is very important. He says, when you said this and you have to attack and you started giving us orders about how to go about it, he said, I wasn't listening to you. I was just sitting down and imagining those Hindi movie sequences where, there is a photograph of a guy with that sandalwood garland around that photograph and agarbattis and R.P. Singh's photograph there. He was a good guy, people are saying and praying like that. He says, I imagined that. But I suppose it wasn't his mistake because the situation was such. It was a very difficult situation. Anyway, the idea, the plan which I had contemplated was capture this, go through this Jumplungpa area here like this, come up to this base over here and then attack him straight, go for the jugular here. Easier said than done. My problem was from this base area from where I start, it is a 14 hours march till here. 14 hours with all your arms, your ammunition, your rations, amounting to almost 90 pounds of weight per man. Now in 14 hours, how many hours of darkness do you think you can get maximum? Can anyone just tell me? In 14 hours of any time, ideal situation, how many hours of darkness do you think you can get? Maximum? 8 hours? Because in mountains the moonlight is also pretty bright and the sun also comes up pretty fast. Say about 8 hours. That means 6 hours of daylight. Now that means 6 hours of exposure. And that is going to be hell. So should the exposure be here initially so that the surprise is maintained till we go there? Should it be in this area where the darkness is required? Should it be in this area the darkness is required, or should it be in this area the darkness is required, or should it be here when you start initially so that you quickly make an entry? That was a dilemma faced by me. So anyway, due to military training and whatever little experience that we gathered, I finally decided that I want the darkness most when I am here. He knows I am coming, but he doesn't know from where I am coming, number one. He doesn't know what time I am coming and with what strength I am coming. So this is the place where I want the darkness, and that's what we planned. The idea was very simple. We go this way, and while we are going this way, our parties are positioned here and they are firing upwards. Our artillery guns from somewhere here, this area, they are also pounding these areas to keep their heads down. And we kicked off during daylight. We reached somewhere around here, Jumplungpa, and the enemy started firing at us. I could hear the staccato of machine gun fire. And initially we thought that this is the gunfire from our own weapons. But later on we realized there was a puff of dust everywhere. And suddenly the dust started getting closer and closer, and once the bullet came and hit my boot and went through it. And the impact threw me off and I fell down. That is the time my guard protection party and the other people realized that the fire is becoming very effective. After all, though the distance is there, but still they have got those long range weapons too. And of course the artillery firing was also there. When I fell, then the boy said, "Saab, run. Now it is difficult, you must start running." Imagine in this altitude must have been around 15,000 feet above sea level, where even you take 2-3 steps, your whole windpipe starts burning because of the effort that is required to move. We started running in zigzag. And believe me, when there is bullet flying, when there is danger to your life or limb, you can run faster than an Olympian runner also. It's a fact. It's a fact. Your tiredness vanishes. Because you know, if you are tired, then you're dead. We made zigzags around in this area. We would sit down behind a rock like this, look for the next rock, and then head straight for it with a little bit of a zigzag over here to beat the enemy fire. So one very funny thing happened here. I remember still very, very vividly. When we were around here, this area, there was a small rock under which I was hiding, and then I saw a huge rock with another small rock near it. So I said, that's a good place where I can take a good breather. So I ran for it. And my protection party boy was also there. We both, when we were approaching that place, that big rock, fire also started being a little more intense because we were closer there. I saw there was a huge cacti plant with those prickly, things at the end, needles at the end. I mean, there's really solid needles. Even in high altitude, I didn't know that cacti grow that big. And sitting down there would have perforated me. So I had to purpose leave that big rock very reluctantly and come to the small rock, and I sat down there. And I was cursing, why did the cactus have to grow there? Anyway, just behind me, I could hear a very heavy panting, a man panting, with great labor. That was my Major Sahab who had just been posted in from Delhi. He had a good cushy tenure in Army Headquarters Delhi, and he had been posted over there for this battle only. He was panting and puffing, and then he was coming like a absolute railway engine. And he was dead tired. I could make out he was dead tired. His name was Chris. So before he could even proceed further, because he wasn't even looking, I told him, Chris, don't sit down, there's a big cacti there. He just didn't bother and he just sat down there. And the whole thing, And that was the day I told him, Chris, you really became holy that day because the cacti really got you there. But he says, sir, there was no seat more comfortable than that seat that day I had. He was that tired. Anyway, so we moved up like this, came up to the base over here and started moving up. Fire was coming, people were getting injured, but not that bad. When we came over here, up here, then the fire started becoming more and more intense. And by the time we reached about 600 yards short of the objective, the main objective of Khaluga top, the fire was too much. It was like an absolute Diwali. I could see the traces coming at me like this, screaming like this. And the bullets were going so close to my face that I could feel that, that hot air, pocket of air which is there in the bullet, just next to my face. And one was so scared to even nod one's head left or move or shake one's head left or right, you might get a bullet that we just charged straight. That was the type of thing. Then my protection party boy, he got shot totally from here till there. He was cut like ribbons into two halves. My radio operator, he also got shot right in front of me. I got few bullets passing through my jacket. I still maintain that jacket with me with bullet holes in it. And then again we proceeded further to about 400 meters short of the objective. And that is the time we had to stop. There was just no way that we could have advanced further. We were going from rock to rock, but it was impossible to move ahead. So when we paused there, I quickly had a look at this area as to where the fire is coming from. Realized that Khaluga top is the place, one place from where the fire is coming maximum, and the other place was a place called Bunker area, which is slightly away from it. So that is the time I called Captain Manoj Pandey, very brave young boy, just 23 years old. And even in his dossier here at NDA, when we read it now, that's why they say that leaders are made and not born. But I feel that leaders are even born. Because when we read this fellow's dossier here now, you have to write a small sort of a article or a biography or a thing as to what you want to become. Everybody says, I want to become the chief of army staff, I want to become the president of India, I want to become the prime minister of India, I want to become this general, I want to become that general. This boy had written, I want to get the Paramveer Chakra. Can you imagine it? He read it now, after his death. And he was a cadet here that time. So this boy was very brave. And I looked around for the other company commanders, I couldn't find it, so this youngster was there, I called him, I explained to him. I said, bunker area is the place where the machine guns are there. I thought there were 2 bunkers with 2 machine guns each. And I said, you must destroy that. Meanwhile, I will take the rest of the party and go right on top. We started with about 400 people. By the time we reached this place, he could muster only about 30 or 35 of the people. I could muster only about 40 odd people. So I said, okay, push off, best of luck. And that young boy, without hesitation, he said, sir, it will be done. And I'll make sure I do it, and I'll tell you when I've completed my job. I said, good, but just be careful. So this boy went up. When he went up, instead of 2 bunkers, there were 6 of them actually. They were echeloned behind each other, which you couldn't see from that place from where you were sitting now. And each bunker had 2 machine guns. Normally one bunker has got 1 machine gun. But since these people were well prepared, they had 2 machine guns. And these machine guns fire at a rapid rate of almost 600 to 1000 rounds per minute. This is the rate. And I have brought in that bag, I don't know where is that bag kept. The size of the bullets that were being fired at us. They were using air defense guns against us. Anyway, so what he planned was, we normally have that fire and move tactics, where few people move from the right, then the fire is attracted there, then few people move from the left, fire is attracted there, then people move from the front, fire is attracted there. You keep on diverting his attention and keep on getting closer and closer to him till you come into the grenade throwing range, and then you throw the grenade and finish off the bunker. So this was his plan. Out of those 6 bunkers, 4 of them were closer to each other and 2 of them were slightly away. So he told one Havaldar, you take 10 chaps with you, I'll keep the remainder 20-25 boys, and I'll finish these 4 bunkers, you finish those 2 other bunkers. So that Havaldar went off that side, and with his 20 odd boys, he went towards this bunker over here. They approached. First bunker, Manoj Pandey threw the grenade, managed to destroy it. Second bunker, threw the grenade, destroyed that bunker, killed all the people over there. Third bunker, when he approached, there was a lot of fire. By that time they had realized this direction of attack. There was a lot of fire from there with the machine gun, and he got a machine gun burst on his shoulder and his thigh, and he was bleeding profusely. The boys told him, Sahab, aap chhod do, hum karenge. He said, no, my commanding officers told me and I will clear the bunker and go. And he dragged himself, came up to a point from where he could throw the grenade, and the 3rd bunker, he threw the grenade, finished it. Now comes the 4th bunker. By that time he had lost a lot of blood. He had become weak. His reactions and his actions had become sluggish. So they closed in again. He managed to drag himself to a distance from where he could throw the grenade. He opened the grenade, took it out, and he was throwing it into the bunker like this. Like I told you, his movement was sluggish by now, very slow. The enemy saw this Pandey just taking the fin out of the grenade, just took his aim and fired one burst of machine gun. That burst of machine gun went straight through his head like this, through the helmet, through the head like this, and took out all his brains, blew him. And he fell down instantaneously. He was dead. But before he actually fell down, he had already released the grenade. And this grenade went into the bunker and actually destroyed the bunker. 4 bunkers he destroyed, this young boy. And look at his Josh. Even when he was shot, bleeding, must have been in terrible pain too. He refused to stop at that point of time, because he had given his word to me that he would destroy it and he would tell me anytime. Now, that Havaldar who had gone ahead to destroy those 2 bunkers, a very brave boy again. First bunker he destroyed, no problems. Second one, when he was destroying the bunker, he also got shot. He also died there. But they destroyed all the 6 bunkers there and established some sort of a lodgement. Meanwhile, with 40 of the other Jawans, I went up, rushed up. This will give you a good idea of the place. Can you see this area? This is how we went here, like this, like this, like this. This complete area is occupied by the enemy. This is the watershed behind. So we went up like this and then moved up like this, Halabar top. Now, around this area I am now stuck, 300 to 400 meters short of it. With 40 boys just rushed up. Now as you keep getting closer and closer to the enemy, firing a weapon becomes that much more difficult because it's got a long barrel. You've got to align the whole thing into his side and then fire at him. By the time you fire, the next shot comes from that side, again you've got to align the whole weapon like that. It becomes very difficult and unwieldy. That's why you require the shorter type of barrels or a pistol to have a close quarter battle. But our boys feel even better when they have to leave the rifle alone and take the kukri out, which they did. They just pulled the kukri out. I still remember here, and that blood-curdling call of Jai Mahakali, Ayo Bakali, still ranging, reverberating on that mountains. And there was a glint of kukri in that moonlit night, I still remember, very, very vividly. And as we were moving up like this, I could see the Paki heads rolling down. Actually, the heads rolling down like this. Boys were just chopping them off. My boys were what? 5 feet nothing. These chairs were Pathans 6 feet something. Boys are just jumping and chopping them off like maize, When the Pakis saw that the heads are being chopped, for them to eat even jhatka is haram. Meat cut with the jhatka is haram for them. And he is saying, now, leave alone Jannat, I will go to Jahannam, but I am cut with the jhatka like this. I do not even eat meat which is cut with jhatka. And here I am being made jhatka here. When he saw that, they panicked. They actually panicked. And it was a sight to behold. 5 feet nothing Gurkha with his kukri glinting in the moonlight, jumping up and chopping it, and these just running. It was like those small children playing, games. And came and captured this area quickly. But of course, by that time, we had got a lot of damage too. I had already got a bullet on my knee, my splinters on my ankle and above, on the calf. Most of the guys got shot, injured. I could hear them screaming, some of them screaming, and most of them quiet. Whenever the bullet was through and through, it was quiet. But when they were shattered, that was too painful. That is the time, only time when I heard them making noise, my voice. Otherwise, the threshold of pain is fantastic. They can take a lot of pain. And where people have a tough time even walking in high altitude, my chaps literally ran. That is the difference between our troops and the normal ones. So, when we reached over here on top, I don't know how. There's a saying that sar mein kafan bandh ke. That was a literal thing because I had cut off my complete thought of the house, my family, my social, my friends, nothing. For me, there was just one thing. That is to reach the top somehow. Because the problem or the crisis was, suppose we had stuck on over here, and if we would have been stuck on there and the daylight would have come, these chairs would have from here, picked us up like flies. We would have been butchered the next morning. Butchered is the word. That was the crisis. It was do or die. I said, in any case we have to die, so why not die trying? And that was what I said, boys, get up. This is the thing. We have to do it now. It is now or never. If we go on top, the whole lot of us who are all stuck and injured over here are saved. If we don't, and if we deter and stay put over here to save our own lives for the time being, next morning we are dead in any case. So I collected these boys, 30, 40 of them, and we went and captured this area. Heads chopped. When I reached the top, I would have barely got a breath when a lot of firing started coming on us. And then I started counting the heads, how many people I have got with me. And to my horror, I had got most of the guys injured, 8 people by the time we reached the top. We were just 8. And we were surrounded from this side, so we had started the attack from this side. We are surrounded from this side. There is all enemy here. All along this side by enemy. And within an hour or so, there was a counter attack from the enemy. Because now they also started getting alarmed. They knew that we have already got a lodgement and a footing here. Manoj Pandey had got a footing here somewhere. It's called Bunker area. And I have got a footing here on top. Now they realized if we sit on top over here, not only do we cut off the supply route which is coming from the top like this here, supply and reinforcement, arms, ammunition, route for them, we also cut off the retreat. Should they have to retreat from here, from where will they go? They can't cross over here, they all mine areas and other people are there. They have to go this way. Now I am not only stopping his supply, I am also cutting off his retreat of his hopes. So it became imperative for him that he has to dislodge me from this area. By hook or by crook, can the earliest. So within an hour we got the first counter attack. We beat it back. By that time we had enough ammunition. We had collected some ammunition from those dead Pakis also, used their own weapons, killed them with them only. But after 2 attacks or so, it started becoming daylight and things became difficult. We started running low on ammunition. Third or fourth attack, I started getting a lot of calls on my radio set. Tiger 1-5, Tiger 1-5, message for you over, urgent message, Roy, urgent message for you over. I got very irritated because I was as it is managing this complete battle and also this complete front which I was looking after till here. Because action was happening around here also at that same time. Being the commanding officer, you're not only commanding this battle here which you're taking part yourself, you're commanding the complete area here like this. In any case, I was not required to move up with the troops as a commanding officer. I was supposed to sit out here somewhere and guide and tell them, yes, do this, do that. But like I told you, I had no choice. If I have to make a statement, I have to do it by leading from the front and leading by example. Otherwise, there's no way. They don't even know me so well. If I had known them right from the beginning, I was commissioned to do the battalions, I know. I tell him he will do it. But tomorrow someone just comes in and says, you do this, you're not going to do that, especially when it means your life. So, I started getting bothered by someone on the radio set. I said, so and so, use the army language. I said, just lay off. Again after 15-20 seconds, so and so, 1-5, direct, urgent message over. When it came 5 or 6 times, I said, there's something quite urgent about it. This fellow won't be pestering me like this, especially when he knows that after the battle I'm going to get him. He's not going to do this. So, I said, okay, Roy, pass your message over. Now, Roy was holding on to this area here. Kukarthang was also held by the enemy. He was holding on to the area here. And from here he could see everything clearly like this through the binoculars. Now what Roy was trying to pass to me was, sir, you are there, 8 of you, we are all watching you. And from here I can see these chairs forming up here and coming for the attack to you. And I can guide you as to where exactly they are coming from. That poor chair was trying to tell me that. I said, you idiot, why didn't you tell me earlier? He said, sir, I've been trying since half an hour. I said, okay, fine. So from here, then he started telling me, sir, from the big boulder area, now there are about 25 to 30 people who are coming up to you. So what I would do, these 8 boys, I would align them towards that direction, and all of them I would say, keep quiet. When I say 1, 2, 3, you all get up, and then you fire towards that area. So the Pakis would come, and I can hear them shouting and screaming. You know, the choices of languages. कुत्ते ये कर देंगे, वो कर देंगे, हिंदुस्तानी ये है, वो है, जरा कश्मीर बना देंगे, ये कर देंगे, ऐसे ठीक है आओ. I also started giving a lot of गाली ऐसे आओ, तुम्हारा स्वागत करेंगे इधर आओ. So when they came, I would just get up there and fire at them and kill quite a few of them, and then they would run back. This thing continued for about 6 or 7 attacks. Then they would come from this side. Again he would tell me, sir, now they are coming from the north, from the top area. So I would align my 8 boys again this side. So these Pakistanis, I'm sure even now they are foxed as to how this guy did it. They still don't know. If I write my book and memoirs someday, that fellow will come and tell me, thank you for writing this, otherwise we were really foxed till date how you did it. Anyway, so we beat back about 6 to 7 counter-attacks like that. But then a situation came when I was left with just 2 bullets, myself, and my boys were also left with 1 or 2 bullets. And I could make out from their reaction as to, they were very tensed up now. The cookies were there, but they were very tensed up. So they looked at me, I looked at them. And I was thinking to myself, I've got 2 bullets, 1 I've kept for myself, and 1 for the, at least I'll take 1 shot before I go. Because the army colonel can't be captured by the enemy, especially a commanding officer. And the way these guys treat prisoners, I mean, it's terrible. And besides that, in any case, a commanding officer can't think of being captured. That will be a shame. So I said, one I will take for myself, that privilege and that luxury I will have, to have a bullet for myself. And the other one is for this guy. And I was thinking, what do I do? You know, it sounds very simple, but imagine, you know, in the next 30 seconds, your life is hanging like that. In the next 30 seconds, you've got to go. Just imagine, put yourself into that shoe and see. In next 30 seconds, I will be no more. It's a terrible thought, I'm telling you, it's a very unnerving sort of a situation. Then I said, no, I must make the situation slightly light. Otherwise, these guys will get too tensed up. They should, even if they have to die, they should die happy. So while these chaps are giving gali, I said, I must think of something to make, elevate this tension. That's why I say a sense of humor is very good for you all. So he was again, Haramzado, Hindustani kutto kaat ke kit kar denge, mujhe malum hai, hame malum hai tumhara gola baruud pura khatam ho gaya. So I also, having been trained in a good public school and the Army Academy, used the choicest. In this case, do we have any Sardar here? No. Do we have any Punjabi here? Okay, good. You'll be happy that I used your language maximum. Because जो मजा आता है पंजाबी में गाली देना, you can't be Punjabi. So that fellow must have been quite sort of impressed by my vocabulary. But just to elevate the thing, I told my boys, you stupid chaps, your commanding officer को तुम्हारा commanding officer को वो गाली दे रहा है और commanding officer अकेला ही उसको गाली दे रहा है. गाली दो. So as you know, our Gurkha Johnnies, they are very disciplined soldiers. But one thing they can't do is give gali. They don't know how to give gali. I'm telling you, it's a very funny thing. But you ask any Nepali child, he will not know how to give gali because हमारे में गाली होता ही नहीं है. So now they were in doldrums. गाली देना तो आता नहीं है, but commanding officer ने हुक्म दिया तो that is पक्का लक्ष्मण का लकीर पकड़. गाली तो देना ही है. So they looked around and they nominated one chap. You are a little extra smart, you are the chap who will give gali. So I still remember that. The Pakistanis are coming closer and they're shouting, Haramzado, ye hai, kutto, ye hai, wo hai. So this fellow gets and says, Pakistani kutta sala, idhar aega tera mundi kaat dega. So I told that chap, look, the Pakis will die, but they'll die laughing because you can't even really kill them gali. Tera korke gali bhi nahi de sakta. Anyway, that elevated their spirits to quite the extent they started laughing at each other. ये हम लोग गाली देना भी नहीं आता है. Then the Pakistanis came closer. Now from 40 yards, they started coming to 35 yards, and I don't know what to do. Situation is grave. Then I remembered that sitting down with my friend Roy here is one Major Dhingra, who was an artillery officer, who was the battery commander attached to us. Now the system is, infantry battalion has artillery officers attached to you. So when the fire is required, all he does is passes on his radio set to guns which are placed far behind, 15 to 16 kilometers behind like this. He just gives them an 8-figure grid reference, map reference, and then he directs the fire with that, with the radio set. The only thing is that the requirement is that the man who is directing the fire should be able to see the target, which Dhingra was. And Dhingra was known as the Mad Hatter because he had one very good pastime. His best pastime was during normal times before the attack. He used to sit down over here. He could see these people. So early morning, because one odd Pakistani poor chap used to come out from his defenses to relieve himself. The moment he used to see this chap, he used to make one gunfire at him. Very close to him. This poor chap would, get up and go to another place. He would ask another gun to fire at him. Whole day this fellow would keep chasing this guy. So I used to call him a mad hatter. I used to tell him, don't torture that poor chap, let him please. You kill him later on, but don't do this torture. So, anyway, but he was a good battery commander, a good gunner. So I trusted him. So I said, Dhingra, do you know where I am? He says, sir, I know exactly where you are. I said, with all your guns, 6 rounds rapid fire. He had 18 guns, Bofors. And 18 guns, 6 rounds rapid fire means 6 rounds per gun. And 6 into 18, 108. 108 rounds, I said, fire on my head. Now one Bofor round falls somewhere in this area, this complete complex will go. It's so powerful. And here I am asking him to fire 108 rounds on my head. So he thought again I have gone mad. He says, sir, please repeat. are you saying that fire on your head? I said, yes. Is there any doubt in the English? He says, no sir. Sir, please affirm, do I fire on your head? I said, then I used my language. I said, you so and so, don't waste my time, and you fire. Then he heard my note with that adjective. He understood that it was me. And then he said, right sir. And then I could hear him giving the orders, and he said, fire. Now the Pakis are closing to me like this. And they are shouting, हमें मालूम है अब तो गोला बारूद भागे खत्म हो गया है, अभी देखो क्या करते हैं. And they are coming closer and closer, 20 yards, 15 yards. So I told the boys, now just get into the rocks, hide into the rocks, because the shelling is going to come. And rocks also make sure that it is slightly elevated above the ground. Military knowledge, because if it is too close to the ground or you are flush, you may still get some splinters. See, all of them went into the rocks, even I went. And the bomb started falling down. The Pakis were caught right out in the open. They did not know what was coming. I could hear the screech of the shells coming at us. That was the loveliest sound I ever heard. The shells coming at you. And they started falling there. You could see those pieces flying. Literally. The Pakis didn't know what hit them. 3 times they did that, and 3 times we got them like that. And by the time, it was already 36 hours. Not a drop of water, not a morsel of food, minus 32 degrees, covered up to here in snow, wet totally, shaking like grandma's tooth. This was our state. And the Pakis, when they caught the thing, they were totally shattered. And like I told you, sitting down there, I still remember that very, very poignant moment, One of my Johnnies was sitting down slightly that side and I was here. And of course, the sniper had seen me and I had a binocular kept over here like this. And he shot at me. Because in my hurry, I had forgotten to take my red tags off. Normally in the war, you take off your ranks and all this. I had no thought for myself. I was with the boys totally. I had not even carried my weapon. I had just carried one pistol over here, which is like a pea shooter in actual battle. So this fellow took a shot at me with the binocular here. The bullet went through like this and through the binocular. It saved my life. I have got the binocular here today. I'll show it to you how the bullets went through and through. So close it was. Then one of my boys was there. I told him, don't move. But he thought he saw some action there and he wanted to make sure that he is observing correctly. Look at the dedication of that chap. He knew that if he gets up, that sniper was so accurate. Later on we captured his rifle and we saw it was the type of the rifle and the ammunition which they use in Olympics, that precision rifle. That fellow was really getting our guys with the sniper rifle. So this fellow got up just for a second and thud, thud, I could hear that bullet just hitting him. Just that sound, and he fell down. I still remember it was totally white snow over there. This poor chap fell down. And the first reaction of any man who is hit by a bullet is, my God, I've been shot, I've been hit. You mean to say I'm going to die? That shock was there in his face. Sir, mujhe goli lagi sir. I mean, that shock hadn't got him, but he couldn't digest the fact. And then he just fell down there. He couldn't move. Then that snow which was white in front of him slowly started turning crimson and red. That blood started pouring out. And then later on, after about 5 minutes, he realized that he is not going to make it back. He looked at me with those eyes like this, dull eyes like this. I still remember. And I was hiding behind the rock, hiding behind the rock. Cold absolutely. He said, "Sir, thoda sa pani pila do, sir." He was feeling thirsty. He said, "Thoda sa pani pila do, sir." I couldn't even get up to give him water. If the moment I get up, he's going to blast my head off. So I said, "Okay, aisa karo, tum thoda muh kholo." And I crumpled some ice like this, made it into a ball, and I tried to throw it in his mouth. Once, twice, 3 times, and he would open his mouth slightly open like that. The 5th ball I threw, he was dead. I mean, these sort of things I can never forget. I still keep getting haunted by these dreams, My young boys, I still feel very bad for them. Anyway, so that is how we spent our 36 hours over here, and by the time the last attack was blasted off by the artillery fire, my reinforcements came up under my second in command over here from this side, and this whole area was captured. After this area was captured, it was a virtual rout of the enemy. Everywhere we went, we only found ropes hanging, where they had just slithered down the rope and run for their lives. We came down from here, captured these areas complete. These complete areas, we decimated a lot of them. Came here, went further up to take the 0.5900 and all these areas over here, and right up to the watershed. Within a month, we had cleared everyone. 11 formidable peaks we have captured during this war. That is why, besides the other gallantry awards and other things which are there, the major thing that we achieved here was a Paramveer Chakra, which Manoj Kumar Pandey got on my recommendations, and the battalion, besides getting the unit chief's unit citation, has also been christened by the chief and the president as the bravest of the brave for its actions. So finally, I wish you all the best. I wanted to deliberately make it short because I also got some engagements coming up. I could have carried on for a longer time. But suffice to say, it was great having shared this moment with you. I wish you all the best. And to reflect what my soldiers have sacrificed and what they would be saying, I will quote to you an epitaph written on a tombstone in the cemetery or the graveyard at Kohima. This is a graveyard which they made for the soldiers who laid their lives down in the Second World War in Kohima, Nagaland. The epitaph which is there, it says, "When you go home, tell them of us and say, when you go home, tell them of us and say, for your tomorrow, we gave our today."
Wow.
I have got with me a bullet and the binocular which was shot through and through. I will show it to you. You have a look. The normal bullet size is, you take a small finger and just put your finger like this. This is the size of a normal bullet. Even this is a bigger bullet, you can say. But the bullet that they fired at us was not so small. The size of the bullet is here. Remember, just 2 grams of explosive is enough to kill a man. With this sort of a thing, it can shatter you. I have neutralized this. I have kept this like this so that you know. This can shatter you. It just makes a big hole and then carries a 5 or 6 kgs of meat off from the back. I have seen that happening. This blows you apart. And the binocular which I have here is this. When I was wearing it like this, and the bullet came like this, you can see the bullet hole, and went out like this, gone out like this. This was the type of closeness with which we went, Because I was shot in the leg and splinters on the leg, and they kept telling me, come down, you have done your job. But I said, no, if I come down now, the whole thing will collapse. The operation would have gone for a 6. So I held on for 36 hours with all this bleeding and pain and the other trauma that was going on. But it paid off well. Thank you. I leave this. You can have a look.
I'd like to really thank Colonel Rag for an extremely beautiful session here today. Today we got to learn not only all the management objectives what we have seen in the books. I think just listening to him gave us told us everything in that. To Colonel Rag. I request Mr. Chinchpadkar to come forward, hand over the bouquet and the memento. Thank you. I think he deserves a standing ovation.